Hello everyone, I'm a little bit late to the party as today's video is going to feature the Mego Lieutenant Worf and Borg Queen figures that were released in the middle of the summer last year. I'd earmarked both of these as good candidates for Christmas presents, and hence that is why there's been a little bit of a delay getting around to reviewing them. Now, as you may remember, these are special releases. These were part of the Topps exclusive Mego releases that took place last year. Although pre-orders went in 2021, these actually got around to being released in the summer of 22. Mego did get around to producing mass market variants of these figures though. Most notably, the Worf, as you can see, is massively different. This is the Worf from his Deep Space Nine years and that Deep Space Nine costume there. So obviously a very different costume, but it has the exact same head sculpt. Me personally, I don't particularly like this release because it's not accurate. Of course, when Worf was in Deep Space Nine, he had his hair tied back and that ponytail for pretty much all of his appearances. So this doesn't really quite work for me. But this release, the original release that was part of the Topps exclusive line, is much more accurate to his on-screen appearance in the Next Generation. And he's a much welcome addition to the Next Generation line, which is now starting to flesh out and feel pretty healthy. Thanks to this release, all we really need now is a Dr. Crusher and a Counselor Troi figure, and we'll have a full-fledged bridge crew. So let's get back to the figure in hand, and let's start off by looking at the packaging. Now, the branding on this packaging, of course, will look very familiar. It is the standard branding that we've seen on pretty much most of these recent Mego releases. Of course, this branding is now being updated, and we'll see some different branding in the future. But for now, this is the packaging that we have. It's a little bit dull. I've never been a huge fan of this branding. It just seems a little bit bland in my opinion, but it's pretty consistent with the others in the collection. Of course, up front and center, we have the figure there in that bubble packaging so we can see what we're getting. The real excitement is when we flip it over because we have this fantastic promo image of Worf. I really like this. It's a proper production still, a nice photo of Michael Dorn as Worf, and I think this looks really good and looks pretty good on display. The presentation of this figure is very nice. You will notice that he benefits from the same costuming as the Geordi LaForge figure, which was very nice indeed. And the body type is the traditional Mego body. Now that will please some and frustrate others, I'm sure. But before we get into all that, let's take a look at this head sculpt. Of course, this is brand new. We've never had a Worf in the Mego line before, so this is a new head sculpt. I think this looks really nice, actually. I think they've done a pretty good job. I think they caught the likeness of everyone's favourite Klingon very, very well. The only thing I would say is that I'm slightly perplexed by some of the skin tone they've used because he seems to have washed out the plastic. I'm not sure if there's like a bit of a white wash running over the top of the head in particular around those ridges, which is a little bit strange. I'm not sure why they've done that, but overall, and certainly taken at a distance, this is a pretty nice sculpt all in all, and the paint apps for the most part are pretty nice. As I mentioned, he does seem to have the same costume as Geordi LaForge. That's an excellent recommendation though, because I really like that costume. This looks nicely in proportion in terms of the stripes. He has the comm badge separately. It's a separate plastic piece that is stuck on there, so it has a little bit more texture and depth and looks a bit more screen accurate, which is much nicer than the embroidered version that we saw before. And of course, he has his plastic sash. So this is all one piece. It's a little bit simplistic as you'd expect for Mego, but there's actually quite a lot of detail when it comes to his links and chains there. So I actually think this looks pretty good all in all. As I mentioned, he does have the standard Mego body, so you can see his hands here are the standard hands. This is interesting because it was in this line, or this time I should say, that we were seeing the new Mego bodies being introduced with the better gripping hands and the enhanced articulation around particularly around the elbows and in the arms there. So I'm surprised that they didn't give Worf the benefits of this articulation. It's a little bit disappointing for me personally, but hey, this still works, and at least he's consistent with the other figures in the line. And speaking of consistency, of course, they have given that famous Star Trek boot there, which I think they use for every single Starfleet character, regardless of era, when it comes to Mego. There's no real surprises when it comes to articulation. As I said, this is the standard Mego body, but I will run through it just in case you've never owned one of these before. He does have a swivel at the head, meaning he can move his head from side to side at the neck there. He does have a sort of ball joint in the shoulder, although it's kind of a joint where the elastic band holds it in place. This can be dislocated to allow the arm to move up or down, but it doesn't feel very secure. There is a single joint at the elbow, and of course there is a pin swivel at the wrist, allowing that wrist to rotate 360 degrees and hinge forwards and backwards. Now there's a sort of ball joint in the waist that will allow the figure to move from side to side, lean left and right, and bend forwards and backwards as well, of course. At the legs, there is a hinge at the hip, allowing the legs to kick out to the side, kick forwards, kick backwards, and then there is a single joint at the knee. Now, For the most part, I really like this figure. I have to say, I really like the head sculpt. I think they've done a really good job with that. The costume is top notch, and the overall presentation is really, really nice. I'm a little bit disappointed by the articulation, as I've mentioned, but what really guts me, to be honest, is the complete lack of accessories. Now, Mego aren't known for producing a lot of accessories, although recently we started to see some fantastic experimentation in their Planet of the Apes line and some of their DC characters. I'm thinking of Deathstroke in particular, who comes with all sorts of fantastic guns and goodies, and I'm really disappointed that Worf didn't get a bat'leth, because if ever there's a character that deserved one, it is absolutely him. He needs to have this accessory, so I'm really gutted that he doesn't have that. But what's even stranger is that he doesn't come with anything, not even the standard awful phaser that they usually give the next gen characters, which is a little bit oversized and a bit clunky. So I'm a little bit disappointed that the Enterprise's chief security officer doesn't come with any weaponry whatsoever. So let's move on to the Borg Queen, and if we're talking about disappointment, I better strap ourselves in for this one. Okay, so I think straight away, obviously we can see it is the exact same packaging as we've just seen with Worf, so no real surprises there, but already you're starting to get a sense just by looking at this figure in the packaging that all is not quite right with this figure. If we flip the packaging, we do have this image on the back, and even this manages to be disappointing because it's not a film still. It is this illustrated cartoon version of the character, which again just looks off to me. It's just it's okay, it's fine, but it's not even a particularly good illustration in my opinion. So this is strange. Perhaps this is a licensing issue or a rights issue, or maybe something to do with the likeness rights to any one of the actors who have played the character, either in the films or in the TV show. Perhaps they're just trying to go for something that's a bit more generic and not try and pin it down to any one specific portrayal of the character. But this is a pretty disappointing start. And I'm afraid things don't get much better when we liberate the figure from the packaging, because the dimensions and the overall look and presentation of this figure just aren't great. They're a little bit clunky and a little bit strange looking. Now, for what it's worth, I don't think that the head sculpt is bad. There's actually a little bit of detail in here. I like how they got the bits and pieces coming out the skull cap there, the elongated skull. I think that looks pretty good. And I think they've done their best attempt when it came to the paint apps to try and give it a bit more distinct personality, a little bit of shading around the top of the head. But I think it kind of falls apart a little bit, especially with those bright red lips, which is actually screen accurate, but it just looks a little bit clumsy and a little bit strange here. And it just comes across as a bit of a nightmare Barbie doll kind of appearance. It just doesn't look quite right, and if we obviously try and compare that against a very heavily stylized image that we have of the character from First Contact, we can see there's a lot of detail here that's been missed. Now, Mego is always going to be soft, it's always going to be a very toyetic approach to these characters, but it doesn't really work when you have a character that's so detailed and has so much going on that you can't really match that or replicate that without it looking a little bit silly. And I think this carries through for the rest of the figure. If we look at the costuming, for example, there's just not a lot of detail there. What is there just feels a little bit clumsy, a little bit childish and a bit clunky. And as I said, I know there's an argument to be made for that for Mego as a rule, but I think here it really highlighted with a character like this that has so much texture and so much detailing on it. And when this is produced like this, it just doesn't work really. Also, I have to say, I think the bodies they use for female characters tends to be a little bit awkward anyway, and something about it just always looks a little bit disappointing. There's very few of the female figures in any Mego line that actually look really authentic and really good, and I think particularly the Star Trek characters tend to suffer the most. And of course, just like Worf, she doesn't come with any accessories, but to be fair, this time around, I wouldn't anticipate the Borg Queen come with any accessories anyway. So all in all, a pretty interesting couple of figures, very, very strongly contrasted, I would have to say, in terms of quality and overall appreciation. The Borg Queen is pretty low on my list of favourite Mego figures, to be honest, let alone Star Trek Megos. Worf, on the other hand, is actually quite high up. Certainly, I noted some disappointments with the Worf figure, but all in all, his actual presentation is very, very nice, and he's a very nice addition to this line. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos soon.